A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. In the name of God, the merciful, the mercy-giving. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. In the name of God, the merciful, the mercy-giving. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings throughout the universe. I pray that you're all well. I'm Dustin Craun. I'm the founder of the Center for Global Muslim Life. We're a new center that's really trying to create media content and to incubate ideas around culture and to really go deep with research. A couple of years ago, I was living in Malaysia and I was reflecting on the fact that what we understand about Muslims is mostly our crises. We don't understand the lives that we live. We don't understand the diversity of global Muslim life. And I'm someone who's been blessed, as I'll talk about in this journey, to live with Muslims around the world and live all over the world. I've lived, throughout in different parts of Latin America, in Morocco, in Southeast Asia. I spent a lot of time in Malaysia and Indonesia, and in West Africa and Ghana, and just seeing the beauty of Muslim communities all over the world. And that's really part of the reason why I want to talk about this class is to do this class, is to talk about the journey that I've gone on, the self-transformation that I was able to undergo on the spiritual path, but also just to create space for people who may be beginning that journey, maybe beginning their own spiritual path because of what's opened up in our world, which is the reality of in a really rapidly changing world. And we're in a place that we maybe have never been before in recent times in human history, and a place where we don't know what the future of global order is. We don't know what the future of whole countries will be. We don't know what the future of global economies will be. And so the reality is that we all have to go deeper within ourselves. And we're in this moment where we're in our homes, we're in this halwa, this retreat, and in this month of Ramadan. And so this is a time to go deeper and to really ask big questions about ourselves. And so that's, and so part of what I want to do in building the center is having conversations that take seriously the spiritual path, takes serious the spiritual journey. That can be a part of research. Research doesn't have to just be the Western academic scientific method. It also can talk about what people's spiritual realities are, what their truths are, what alternative epistemologies, forms of knowledge and ontology, forms of worldview are. And that's part of what we want to do here. And even within that, part of that is the role that Muslim converts are playing in our world. There's a lot of Muslim converts all over the world who are leaders in our community, and we should celebrate that and take those people's journeys seriously, like myself. So I thought, what better place to start than with my own journey? That's why we're talking about the path here in this course. So part two is really about our roots and talking about the roots that we are born within, the roots of where I come from, the roots of where we're at as in our state as humanity. And so, but one of the questions, there's a question that a friend reached out to me from last week, and she asked me, one of the biggest challenges is assessing knowledge that is not random or from the interwebs. I get books and all, but I'm all over the place. Ghazali book here, a dua one there, and it's just not structured in a way that facilitates deep into a topic and learning. Also, self-directing learning is hard. Any tips or suggestions? I mean, yeah, that's, last week I went through several principles and baselines for an open heart. And one of the baselines for an open heart that we have to have right now is understanding that to do research or to research a subject online, you should have some basic understanding of how the internet works. Because the reality is you're essentially learning from algorithms when all of your research is online. And so if you know teachers to take from and you know where to find their content, then that is a way that you'll come to it. But if you just are Googling random topics like, I want to know about the theology of Islam, the reality is that the number one hits will be people who are good at, not maybe good at Islam, but good at SEO. They're good at what's called search engine optimization. And this is where algorithms are able to teach you, are able to manipulate and get to the top based on keywords of search engines. And so alhamdulillah, over the last few years, Imam Omar Suleiman has been working actually with Google and some of the other search engines to change what this is, because what SEO is, because the reality is that most of the content about Islam and Muslims was A, Islamophobic content, and then B, it might have been some fairly irrelevant preachers who had old websites that were good at manipulating SEO. And so that's the reality that you have to understand. And my principle related to that is don't learn your Islam from algorithms. Or another way to put it is SEO is not Islam, right? But that's the reality, is most people come to that. So alternatively, what you can do is you should ask. With this class, I'm developing a course list of the books that I'm discussing. There's a lot of, trusted sources out there, whether it's, the Zaytuna colleges of the world, or all the institutions that I link to in my article that you can find on our blog at centerforglobalmuslimlife.com, of the 40 programs from Ramadan, like Cambridge Muslim College, the Cambridge Mosque. Cambridge Mosque literally has a TV channel that's running this whole month. And so there's a lot of content there. But yeah, self-study can be very difficult. And so a proper understanding would be to go kind of piece by piece. Read a good Intro to Islam book. And I can link to some of those translations. Really importantly, you read good translations of Quran while listening to the Arabic to understand what the thing actually is in the original language and the barakah of the Quran. And then maybe from there, read a seerah about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. This is a book, the Shamal, that talks about his characteristics. It's a really beautiful book to familiarize yourself with who he was. And then from there, the reality is we also have to understand history, and we have to understand the way that history has changed Islam, the way that history has changed. It hasn't changed Islam, but it's changed interpretations of Islam. So we have to understand contemporarily who it is that controls the majority of mosques, what they teach there. So what they teach there, like I said last time, is a very elementary understanding of Islam, because that's where most Muslims are at. So it's essentially Quran, Sirah, and some history. And then But they leave out a lot of the portions like spirituality. So how do you find how to connect to Islamic spirituality or to tasawwuf? I feel like to Sufism is one of the most important questions that most seekers ask, because seekers are generally attracted to the spiritual component, the spiritual, like I myself within my journey, as I'll talk about, I was literally meditating at a Buddhist university, and I was involved in sweat lodges and American Indian spirituality, and I was seeking spirituality. And my first book that I ever bought about Islam was a book by Ibn Abi at that Buddhist university in Boulder, Colorado. And so I was seeking spirituality and how to connect with Allah, and how this religion is a pathway to knowing God in your heart, intimately in your life, but we materialize it in such a way based on westernized understandings of the deen, the idea that everything has to be proven through science, and because of that, people have a skewed understanding of how to even teach the religion. And so therefore, people coming to the religion, that's why we see people will convert to Islam, and maybe a lot of people won't stay because they don't know where they live or where they fit within the community. So yeah, so anyway, so those are baselines. So that another good place to start. So finding basic books of tasawwuf, like Imam Ghazali, like you mentioned, those are, so reading within those categories. And then the other one would be theology, is you need to find good books of theology, like Sheikh Hamza, translation of Imam Tahawi's Aqidah is really excellent, and it's very clear. And that's a general Aqidah book. And then the other, I really love Dr. Jackson's book, Sherman Jackson's book, Islam and the Problem of Black Suffering. And one of the main questions that people have in life right now is this issue related to religion, is this issue of suffering. And so Dr. Jackson goes into depth as to how we understand God related to this question of theodicy, or relating to the question of evil and suffering in our world. And so I'd highly recommend those books. So anyway, so again, doing this course is to say that people ask, how did you convert to Islam? And the answer is never easy. And so last week we went over the baseline principles, and today I want to go into the actual beginning of my journey while hitting some some key points. There's a film from 2018 that I really love called Jen by a sister in the community from Oakland. She lives in LA now, named Nigel Mumin, that shows the process of conversion through the eyes of an African American mother and her daughter. And it actually shows the journey of the daughter in particular, who I think is like 16 or 17 in the film. And some Muslims might not like that film because it gets into, like, she has a relationship with someone from the mosque, the young girl does, and she does some things that maybe people might not like. But the reality is, ask any convert about their journey, and the majority of people would say that my journey of conversion, it's not going to be a PG story. Right? It's not going to be all hunky-dory and all good and like I came from a path of purity seeking purity. That doesn't make sense. We all came from difficult backgrounds. We all came from difficult life situations. We all came from something that turned on in us the will and the desire to seek something greater than what was our day-to-day lives, right? And so I think that that's an important thing to reflect upon as I go into this story, is that, again, I want to be real with what my life was and what some of the ups and downs were, so that, as hopefully an inspiration to people to say that, A, you're not alone, and then B, these are some things, there's also some things that you can do when you hit those points in your path. As we talked about in the first session, the fitra, or our primordial state of being, is a reality that we're born into goodness and light coming from Allah. And then we land in the world wherever Allah places us on this earth by His divine decree, right? We believe in the divine decree of Allah and Allah's mercy. And here I was, born in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, in the late 70s, barely the 70s, but still the 70s, really a child of the 1980s and 1990s. And being born in the United States, of course, there's much good and there's much difficulty in this place. The blessing is our diversity of people and life here, which allows us to have access to diverse teachings. Had I been of a previous generation, like my grandparents and my parents even, maybe I wouldn't be as open to these things as I was, based upon the kind of culture, hip-hop culture, and things that allowed me to have a very open heart. But it's because of that diversity that we have an open worldview to humanity and to different teachings and understandings of life around the world. Of course, our curse in this place is the history of this land and the genocides that this country was built upon, and the legacy of white supremacy that still lives with us today. And this is especially true for someone like myself, a white convert coming from a white family, and dealing with that legacy within my own family, within my own lineage, and understanding the trauma that comes from that feeling of being in that reality of trying to be an oppressive race, right? And alhamdulillah, like, we've dealt with that throughout my family's history, and we've dealt with it now, I would say, in a positive way, where we've had conversations, and I was blessed to be born into a really beautiful family. But I would say that because of the deep racial and class-based inequalities around the world, but in the United States in particular, we don't have a normal type of character where, like, of being, of how we are as people, that is historic, where people can look at each other in the eye with a deep sense of trust. It's really, I believe, because of race and racism and the deep class inequality, that we as a people have there's some really ugly characteristics of this place. Like, when I lived in West Africa and Ghana, and people would tell me in the morning, "Good morning," and be very happy and cheery and loving. I had never really experienced that in my life because it wasn't a reality that I grew up with. I think, I've heard that maybe the United States and other places were like that in previous generations, but it's not a reality of what I grew up in now, nor is it a reality that we live within, where most neighbors in this country don't even speak to one another. They don't have really anything to do with one another. And so we have this distrust, I would say, that creates a deep individualism that is philosophical on one level, but it's tied to these realities of mistrust and disunity on another. From an Islamic perspective, and from a spiritual perspective, we're taught about this idea of the four enemies of the path, right? The four enemies of ourself and our lives are our nafs, or our lowest self, our desires that we're thinking of today, the lusts that we have deep within our hearts, the things that we want. That's why Ramadan is a time of clarity and transformation, because we have to be rid of those lusts and desires, because we can't even eat food or drink water, right? Number three is the dunya, or the realities of the world, of this world, this material world that call us to our lower selves. And then finally is the shaitan, which is, of course, the devils that are whispering to you to follow these realities of our lowest selves. And so, and it's interesting, right? If you think about it from a psychological perspective, most people don't want to deal with the nafs and the problems that have been created within our families and within ourselves. Instead, we go straight to shaitan, right? Oh my gosh, the shaitan is impacting my life. The devil is impacting my life. Right? Instead of looking at what is the reality that has been inculcated in me from my state of fitra and pure being, into having all of these desires and problems within myself that I need to deal with, right? We don't even look there because we just go straight to the other, because we don't want to look deep at what our family problems are, what our historical problems are. Like I talked about in the first lecture, the realities of the soul wound or intergenerational trauma. So if you think about a place like the United States, and this is why most people around the world who have all this desire to come here and have never experienced the madness that is this country, this place is set up to follow those four things almost without question. So it's almost the opposite in terms of having our fitra be developed in a way that's opposite of what the things we should be resisting. And that's why, like I said, there's a lot of blessing in this place. There's a lot of beauty in this place. There's a lot of goodness in the people, but there's a lot of pain and difficulty and trauma as well, right? So this place, I often say the United States is all nafs. And so if you look at what's happening right now as a perfect example, where we're told that there is a virus outside that could kill us. And I've had friends who've had the virus, but yet people don't want to sit in their homes. Because they can't fulfill all the desires that they had previously. They can't watch their sports. We can't go to the hookah bars. We can't go to the bars and drink. We can't do all of the things we did. We can't be with family and friends. The natural desires that we have within our hearts, and we can't do those deeper things. And it's because of that we fail, and that the society is breaking down, right? Where we have this rugged individualism that separates us not only from other people, it even separates us from our own families, where we don't have a normal, a traditional family structure where people live with each other, take care of each other. We have, one of the things that's not often talked about in forums like this, where we're talking about Islam, is that we have capitalism without limitations. Right, the system of neoliberalism, again, a system that you need to understand why the society is breaking down, why capitalism is breaking down, is because of this system that's been put in place with no social protections, no protection. When historically, Islamic governments, as examples, I'm talking back in the day of pre-colonialism, were set up in a way where there were structures to take care of those most in needs. There were systems of wakaf, systems of zakat and sadaqah, of charity, that would take care of all of those people, the poor people, the more needy people. They would take care of all of those in need. This system of neoliberalism does away with any structure that would take care of those most at risk. And in the United States, we see this, where we have a health system where you can go get, at the beginning of this crisis, you could go get a corona test, and it would cost you like $10,000 if you didn't have insurance. So, of course, where have these outbreaks been taking place? Within the poorest people within the society. So you set up a system of capitalism with no limitations, where all that people want is their desires. You can create any type of business, these gambling businesses, and alcohol businesses, that then set up forms of advertising that seek to activate our lowest sense of self, right? Like really good examples of that are old school Marlboro Man ads, where it was this idea that you were this rugged individual, this cowboy, this white man, right? This desirous conception of being. And those were the advertisements. Whereas now they've, at least in parts of Asia and parts of the world, they've made them start putting like pictures of people's lungs and holes in their throats to show the realities of what cigarettes do. That's one example where they have to advertise the reality of what it is. But that's the only thing I can even think of in the entire world where they have to advertise what things actually do to you. Whereas sugar, alcohol, marijuana, drugs, none of these things are we advertised to in a way that it actually talks to us about what our lives are, or makeup and, the chemicals that are in makeup. Right. And so a really great place to look at this to understand what this has done to us in terms of activating this lower self and these desires is this film called The Century of the Self by the British documentarian Adam Curtis. You can find it, I think, on Vimeo or YouTube. It's a really, really excellent film. And what it does is it shows how it was Sigmund Freud's nephew who is at the foundation of advertising in the United States. And he took his uncle's ideas of how to get into the desirous self, how to activate the desires of humans, and he embedded that within advertising. And so that's where the advertising industry comes from. Three or four that I highlighted. But because capitalism has no limitations and because our world is structured around our desires, we spend our lives trying to fill our hearts with our desires when the only reality that can fill our hearts is, of course, Allah. And so that's the problem with living, in Spanish, they call this el mundo invertido, the upside down world. People like, that's the world that we live in. We live in a world that is completely upside down, where how we take care of our soul and our nafs and how we have a balanced life in our heart, we live in the reality and we're born into a reality that's opposite of that. So, of course, we're going to really, really struggle with how to transform ourselves. So we drink, we look for it in sex, in pornography, in drugs, in food, whatever we can find to fulfill that empty space in our hearts because we don't have a relationship with Allah. And then the other layer of this, right, is the civilizational layer. We don't really have a defining civilizational characteristic in the United States except for that of our militarism and our neoliberal capitalism that are our exports, right? And the culture that we export with this culture that's on Netflix and other places of this individualism of always seeking what you want personally, your nafs, that's the worldview that is exported. But at a civilizational level, the way Sayyid Naqib al-Atas again talks about the worldview of Islam, he defines this term adab, right, as a civilizational reality that's about the character of a people. And adab is related to the idea of justice. And justice is when things are in their proper place within a civilization. So the civilization that's in the correct worldview of Islam, according to Sayyid Naqib, is where Allah is in his proper place at the center of human existence, at the center of our existence, of all of our thoughts, of understanding that we have limitations on our being. The reality of that is having no civilizational reality or a civilization that would call to people that is other than Allah and has no adab or no civilizational reality. Within this, of course, God is within his proper place. Humans are within their proper place, and family structure has even its proper place, right? Sayyid Naqib talked about this in his book on justice and the nature of man, with this really beautiful Arabic calligraphy on the front. This book, I think, is difficult to get in the United States, even on Amazon, but if you're looking for how to get it, I can put you in touch with the people who got the goods. So when things are out of order in our lives can become very difficult. So like I said, now back to my own self, this is the civilizational reality that I was born into. I was placed, alhamdulillah, with a really beautiful family, with beautiful parents, beautiful grandparents. I have a beautiful sister, and I had good teachers as my grandfather and my grandmother and my mother and my father, and And they say, one of my teachers, Dr. Omar, he talks about how our lineage is like two rivers, right? And then they meet together, and that's our reality. So we don't really understand. Most of us have no idea where we're from, or anything past our grandparents or maybe great-grandparents in terms of our history. I'm blessed to have a family member who's actually spent a lot of his life, like years, going through my family's lineage that shows us back to the realities that my family came from when different parts came to the United States. But that's only for like one part of the family. If you think that each of your realities, your parents and your grandparents, those are four families, just to think of it at that level, that are coming together from your grandparents, and then two families coming together at your level of your parents. So you're dealing with all the energy of that lineage of those families that are coming into our lives and coming into us as a being who is born through this miracle of Allah, and in the stomach of the mother, and then birthed into this world with all of its beauty and difficulty and pain and love. So my mother was a daycare teacher who always spent her life working at church daycare programs. And she was a really, really beautiful human being who passed about 6 years ago, Allah yarhamaha. And my father, and my mother was always very religious and very spiritual. And so that was really at my roots where I got my sense of seeking spirituality from, is from my mother. And my father was an electrician, or my father is still an electrician who is 100% union man, right? IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I spent the youngest photos of me, the smallest, at the youngest age I've ever seen, were me at a union parade, Labor Day parade, when I was about 1 or 2 years old, right? And so that's where I'm from. Father as a member of the union, and who was always very politically oriented. And my family, my grandfather was in the union, and we had leaders of the family who were leaders of the union on the East Coast. And so that's where the roots of my politics. But generally speaking, we don't know these histories. So especially many people in the U.S. and the tragedy of this country, of enslavement, of American Indian genocide, and of, the reality of a lot of people fleeing, who are immigrants fleeing to this country. Like my family is, generally speaking, my Italian side and my German side, we don't really know why they left even Europe. We had heard that there was, some fear, especially in Italy. It was probably related to growing fascism in this era of Mussolini, but I had family members who fled to the United States in the early part of the 20th century, right? And they came to the United States, and racism was so bad at that time or anti-ethnic racism against Italians was so bad at that point that my family members who came to this country wouldn't allow their children to speak Italian at all. And so essentially it's at that point where we're cut off from any really ethnic background, let alone the German, the Swedish, the English in me. I don't know any of these backgrounds, where then in American suburbs, cultural whiteness, everything is birthed together and we are culturally white. That's why you have people who put on the census, white people on the census, that will mark the box and write that they are American, that they have no ancestry, that their ancestry is, quote, American, because either they don't know or they don't want to recognize, and that can have to do with the legacy of white supremacy as well, right? So generally speaking, we don't know our roots, and this can be a very painful thing for most of us. And some of my teachers have talked about how on that day of judgment, one of the things that will be revealed to us is the reality of lineage. Who is related to who? Who are descendants of the Prophet ﷺ that we may not even know about? Who are descendants to prophets more broadly on this earth? And what does that have to do with who and how their character was? So we pray, to experience that day in all of its beauty and to know those things. But like we talked about, within my own family, we had a part of my family that had a beautiful upbringing, and the family was together. And then another part of my family where there was a lot of difficulty and trauma and a lot of alcohol and drug abuse and other forms of abuse that created madness, and it created great difficulty for my entire family. And so I remember, one day in particular, my Uncle Galen was about 6 years older than me. And he was a beautiful young man. And whenever I got to spend time with him, I really loved it. And I looked at him like a brother because I didn't have an older brother, and he was the closest thing that I had. And I remember once when we were younger, there was this creek by my house where I grew up in the suburbs of Denver. And we were playing in this creek, and I would always, walk around the creek and go there just to get outside. And as a young kid, right? And one of these days, Galen was with me. We were playing in the creek. All of a sudden, I fell in a hole, and I didn't know how to swim. And it was a pretty deep hole, and I would have been stuck if he wasn't there. And I often walked in that creek by myself. But that day, Galen was with me, and he pulled me out. He pulled me out, and I believe he saved my life in many ways, right? And so, like I said, me and my Uncle Galen were very close, but Galen was dealing with things that I wasn't dealing with in my own life. He was dealing with pain in my own life, and he was dealing with the reality of drugs and alcohol that were part of our family history. And so, unfortunately, my Uncle Galen died of a heroin overdose when I was about 16 years old. And that to me was a real wake-up call because I was already partying at that point. I was already going out. I was already hanging out too much and having fake IDs and trying to go to the 16 and up clubs that were in Denver, let alone like the 18 and 21, right? That's the age we started partying, was like 15. And so when he died, it was a huge reflection on what I wanted to be in the world, who I was. And I always remember thinking about Galen throughout my life and all the difficulties that I faced as I struggled with my own forms of addiction and my own difficulties. I remember how beautiful he was, and that the reality of drugs and alcohol and the pain of this life and familial abuse took him from us, right? They took him from us at a young age. May God, have mercy on him and bless his soul. But I always thought at that point in my life that I was going to die young. I always thought that I wouldn't be able to make it to be 30. Even getting to the age of 30 is something that I couldn't have imagined when I was young because of this. And so that's the reality that I was born within. Of course, the 80s and the 90s and all the cultural realities in place at the time as well, whether, the cultural things of Star Wars and, like I said, 90s hip hop. And I remember the time Galen died, it was right around the time Tupac was murdered. And I remember that moment really, really strong. And so, we pray for everybody in these times. And so that to me is the baseline of where I come from. That was the moment to me that really sparked within me wanting to seek something greater than what I was born around, and wanting to know God and have purpose in my life. As someone seeking truth and reality, but also someone who always wanted to seek justice as well as an activist. And so that's the end of this session. We pray that Allah opens all of our hearts and blesses us in this month of Ramadan, and that we're all given guidance and tawfiq, His divine assistance in all things that we're doing. We pray for whatever struggle your families may be going through around the world. These are times of great difficulty and struggle in people's personal lives, in our hearts, in our jobs, and our wealth. We pray for our risk, our sustenance from Allah, and that we pray for a transformation of this world to be more aligned with the divine providence and the divine will, and that we pray for a complete eradication of this disease from this earth. And we also pray for our brothers and sisters on the front lines around the earth. May Allah bless them. We're also going to have some programmings with frontliners and healers. We also have a series called Ummah Builders I'm doing. I'm going to try to do this class about every other day. So may Allah bless you. And wherever you're at all around the world, Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessing.